I brought my wonderful panelists with me.
Yes, thanks for that.
Welcome, everyone, to this exciting discussion about art and the future of art. We've entered a new era in this world of art, where the boundaries of our creativity are being pushed every day above and beyond. And today, I have the privilege of talking to these four panelists about the arts we are in and the future of the arts. Before we start, I would like to give all of our panelists a short moment of time to explain what they do, who they are, and what their relationship is with art. Because art is experience, and we would actually want to see the art they make. And therefore, I would like to invite them to take us on a journey, a small journey, in their world of art. And then we can start the discussion. And I hope you have questions too, because I will also reach out to the audience to ask questions to our panelists. Jacco, can I ask you to start?
Sure. Yeah, it's working. Cool. So my name is Jacco Borggreve, and I consider myself a new media performance artist. And that's a very, I guess, a bit of a complicated issue, because what is a new media performance artist? What I do is I use different kind of technologies that I, let's say, assign or attach in different ways to my body to research what it actually means to have a body. So the example that was briefly mentioned was a project from 2017, actually, quite an old project, where I implanted myself with a microchip that I then attached to a GPS system, basically, to broadcast my physical location for the world to see. So I live kind of an open source reality for 8 months. And during that project, my house was broken into 4 times. My insurance got denied. I got physically assaulted on the street twice. I was sent over 30 pictures of myself without me having the ability to actually kind of know where those pictures were coming from. And that taught me a lot about this idea that I will, I guess, put forth in this panel, which is radical investment in the arts. So the ability for the artist to radically push boundaries of what is acceptable, what is possible, and what is desirable, let's say, when we're dealing with new technologies.
Thank you. Sarah, can I give the floor to you?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm also an artist slash designer, and I'm very interested in speculative future scenarios. And one of the scenarios I designed was based on a person, an alter ego called Horst. And I made a big chicken that some people in Enschede might know, because it's been on show here quite a while. And also I'm showing a work at the expo that is called the Fan Fiction Wishing Well, in which I kind of investigate, like I asked myself, what do these new technologies bring, like what will they, will they affect storytelling and also moving images? And I think that people will just feed off popular narratives and make their own versions of it. And for this artwork, I invited speakers of the Dutch Innovation Days to tell a story about the future. And I turned it into video and also meshed them all together. And yeah, what I'm interested in is to see how coherent these stories are if you are putting them into visuals. Does that make sense?
Yes?
Yeah.
Really interesting, and go check it out and join her journey of figuring it out. It's really, really interesting. So we have your story, we have the radical story, but on our left...
Hi,
David.
I'm David. I'm artist based in the UK. I work across physical and digital media, and I'm quite interested in simulation, technology, and food. So I'm interested in simulation, everything from sort of Hollywood explosions that are more explosion-y than real explosions. I'm interested in why we would attempt to reproduce lived experience or physical reality within a digital or even maybe physical way. So for example, for a very long time, I've been making work about cultured meat, cellular agriculture, some people call it, but I'm kind of intrigued by that entire process of recreating a piece of meat in the most kind of tangible way possible. Why would you want to make a steak with a perfect marbling that was never actually a cow? And my projects essentially are sort of speculative in nature. They either posit potential future scenarios or imagine pasts that were not ever, well, never actually happened. And the artworks that I make within those projects are sort of like artifacts from those half-understood worlds.
My name is Tom. I'm not a professional artist, but I've worked a lot with artists in my career, which started at Utrecht University, where I researched digital culture. So we reflected a lot on culture and the role of the artist in that process. And then I worked for Setup Media Lab with a lot of artists. So that's a collaboration of scientists and artists. And now I work for HKU, Utrecht University of the Arts, for 6 years. And I work with a lot of young talents that want to make their next step in the arts field. So they just graduated, and we have a platform for that group of people. It's called HQX, and 3 of them are also presenting their work right now at the exhibition here. It's in Our Nature at the festival. And I reflect a lot on the future of the arts. So I'm also investigating AI and what the role of AI will be in that future. And I think 3 roles can be defined for artists. I think artists can invent that future. So not only inventing the technology, but also inventing new narratives, new metaphors, new future scenarios. I think artists explore that future, so they seek the boundaries of what's possible with new technologies. David, for example, with his Nerve project. But I also discovered a quote just this morning, and it was about artists preventing the future. So by exploring future scenarios, and maybe Black Mirror is an example of that, we can also talk about what futures we don't want, and we have to decide to steer in another direction.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful sort of suggestion you're making, that there are 3 ways for an artist to be. And we have 3 other artists on the couch. So if you follow these 3 examples, Jacco, what would you consider yourself? Are you exploring it, living it, or are you preventing it?
I think in general, it's ideally, I think as an artist, you exist somewhere between the hurdle of worrying about the future, but then at the same time not actually participating in the creation of it. So I like to kind of present a paradox here, where we all talk about making speculative work, and at the same time we're not futurists, we're not scientists, we don't really know anything. Fundamentally, I'd like to make this claim and I research artistic knowledge production quite a bit. And so far, my conclusion is that no new knowledge can be gained through the arts. And this is a kind of a radical claim. But what I mean by that is what art can do, mainly, is it can bring people together and can bridge interdisciplinary boundaries to then come up with new solutions. So for me, fundamentally, it's not necessarily about kind of living the future, preventing the future, thinking about the future. For me, it's mainly about this process of opening up discussions, and then that opening up of discussion hopefully leads to new things.
And what is the effect of where you open the discussion? Don't you think you have some sort of suggestion there as an artist?
Yeah, that's a really lovely thing, right? Because as artists, we're used to working in let's say the general art institution, whether that be musea or galleries or whatever. And I think this platforms like these are very lovely because they open up artists to be, let's say, change makers in not necessarily artistic institutions. And hopefully that opens up, for example, room for the artistic view within politics or the artistic view within universities, for example. And I think that's I mean, when we're talking about the future of art, I think that's where we hopefully will talk about in a bit later, is this exact kind of paradigm shift, where the artist right now is, let's say, migrating from existing in the artistic institution to existing in the broader institution as a whole, because right now we're demanded to be these kind of placemakers, and that's because of, let's say, subsidy streams and the way things are going in that direction, and global politics, whatever, we can talk about that later. But but fundamentally, I think that's maybe a very long answer to the question. I think it's the place of the artist is somewhere in the in-between of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if I understand correctly, art can become a tool to actually help other people talk about difficult topics. Because I think you're also exploring societal topics and such. Do you agree with what Jacco says?
Partially. I do think that art adds, I don't know what you mean by knowledge, but I do think that the value I see in art is that there's a lot of facts, and then you kind of add the feeling, or you make the picture a little bit more clear around it, and maybe that also brings in other disciplines, and in the end, no new knowledge is created, but the way it's combined, I think that's the interesting part of art.
That's completely what I mean. I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so knowledge are not the facts, but you can actually dress it, you can make it open for feelings and change something.
Yeah, like for instance, the chicken project started out with research being done into the protein transition, and scientists proposing that one way of making meat production or the protein consumption more efficient is by only eating chicken that are raised in a special way. And then I thought about, okay, but who would be a person that would still eat meat but only chicken?
Are there any people in the room that only eat chicken, maybe?
Yeah, and then I tried to come up with a personality, and then it became this person with, this guy who was just obsessed with it and was seeing the chicken as something very sexual, and then crossed the border and even made it his sexual partner. But then it was like world building from this one very small fact or like idea, but then how to go from that and how to make it graspable, and then I think it's way easier for people to relate to and to discuss about.
Yeah, so maybe it's nice for people in the audience who haven't seen your chicken to shortly give an explanation about what it looks like.
Yeah, it's a big chicken. It's about this size, and it has 3 pocket pussies, and you can, and it's naked, and it's like this.
Yeah, so you made it really visible, large and visible for people to experience the story you're telling about the sexual relationship, and then people could sort of, by going to your chicken or seeing it, experiencing that.
Yeah.
And in that way, you're opening
a conversation. Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah.
Lots of conversations about it.
And how about you, David? Do you think you're exploring the future, experiencing it, or blocking it?
I think it's an interesting conversation we're having about sort of where the art happens or where it's encountered, and how maybe that affects people's reaction to whatever you were proposing. And one example that illustrates that from a previous project was in 2017, I was on a residency for a while, and the result of it was an imagined retrospective of the next 50 years. So it was sort of set in 2070, looking back at this sort of period and what happened within the meat industry and within cultured meat production, and the kind of, is the whole kind of like societal background, economic impact, etc., etc. But one of the very fortuitous things about it was that it was hosted in a science museum in Bristol. And although it was very clear, if you read the signage, that this was art, no one read the signage. And so the museum came back with the feedback that quite a few of the visitors were quite shocked, quite upset they hadn't realized that this had taken place, which of course it hadn't. But the way that I'd put the exhibition together was very coached in that sort of science museum aesthetic language of truth. And so people, excuse the pun, they swallowed it as truth. And that's a very interesting way to be able to propose potential futures, as this could be your truth.
Yeah. Perhaps you could see the honest reactions in that sense on the real truth. So also, again, you're saying that it really matters where you perform the art, where you open up the conversation, because that actually makes the story a lot different. Tom, do you talk a lot with your students about what it means to become an artist in these times?
Yeah, that's actually our main focus. I totally agree with what Jacco said. So where does the art of the future take place? Maybe not in the museums. Maybe that's not the most impactful place. But we have to bring the art to health organizations, to the climate change debates, to other places where other stuff happens too. And maybe don't even call it art, but perform the art while doing other things as well. So we have some education taking place within health organizations, for example. So they perform health jobs too, as a part of their education. So they help people, they take care of people too. And in the process, they learn about what their roles and artists within a health organization can be. And I think that's a perfect experience for students. And it's maybe even very profitable if you look at where the money can come from. So you're taking a bit from the budgets of the health budgets of a government, for example, instead of just pushing each other and competing with each other within that small culture budget. So I think that's the future of art, where it should take place.
Yeah, and how can we make that? How can we speed up it happening?
I think the only way to kind of speed it up is to play linguistic games.
Okay.
So like what I mean by that is I've been like frustrated with myself for the last 3 minutes because I'm trying to remember a name and it's not managing. So I'm sorry if for not mentioning the name of this person, but he got a kind of like a commission by the harbor of Rotterdam. So like a huge commission to make a sculptural piece, and he wanted to reflect the present and potentially the future of the harbor of Rotterdam. And then his piece ended up being a request to be admitted to the board of directors of the harbor. And that was the piece. And it didn't happen, and everyone was very upset with him. And, you know, like, damn you for costing us all of this money, and then you come up with this piece of shit, you know, like that. But it was incredibly sincere, and to this day, I think I'm so sorry for not remembering this guy's name, but it's one of the, I think, the best pieces of his career. Because for me, kind of like the statement that you make as a place to allow this kind of radical intervention from, let's say, public sector. And it is also kind of like, if you think of the rough line, also we're, I guess, considering ourselves media artists in the place, like we don't make necessarily, it's not about the object. It's not about the object orientation, but rather it's about the process and the story and the context, right?
And the effects of
that thing, of that process, yeah. So that is very applicable to being used in a way that you don't even necessarily need the object anymore. You know, and of course the object is illustrative and is doing wonderful things, and it forms a relation with the audience. It does all of these things. But I am completely for kind of like a normalization of the immaterial aspect of the arts, and that's simply a mentality. That's very silly to say maybe, but it's very simply a mentality.
All right, I think that's interesting. But then art sounds like it's more of a mental connection you can have with each other, or an opener. But on the other hand, you also see everyone becoming an artist by producing actual digital or physical objects. How does that relate to each other, Tom? How do you talk about these? Everyone can be an artist, AI generating.
That was me. Sorry.
Okay, that was a piece of art. Too.
No, I touched my pocket.
Not a physical.
Happy
piece
New
of
Year.
art. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there has always been some kind of competition between the amateurs and the professionals. I think having a degree is some kind of a label you can use for your own advantage. But there are also great artists that didn't go to art school. So you just have to make it by making it, instead of just relying on if you're a professional or not. But I think we see two trends. So an explosion of media content, because everyone can use digital tools for 30 years now, Photoshop, etc., to publish things and push them into the social media sphere. So that is not that new. But there's also a lot of talk about how AI will also lead to the next explosion of media content and wannabe artists. And I am one of that AI amateurs that tries to make art with AI, and many will be, but it's just not relying on just the status of being a professional and making your way into your profession and talking to a museum if you want to have an exhibition and show your strength instead of relying on a diploma, for example. And I think then you will make it, and then you'll find your strategies. Yeah. But you can also, as an artist, go to other sectors like the harbor of Rotterdam and say, I want to work here. And they will say, you're an artist, you're not a harbor employee. And then try to make sure you're just as valuable as the other people that are going for the job, for example, if you want to be the director. So I think every individual has their own chances of achieving something.
Yeah, I agree, and everyone should have also.
Yeah.
But because there are more people that could potentially be amateur artists or professional artists, or maybe you don't even want to make the distinction. David, do you think artists have some sort of moral obligation on the art they make? Or are they free to do anything they can because they can?
That's a good question.
You can use AI, only I can as an amateur.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think that we are free to do what we want, but then I think probably most of us make work because we have something that we want to communicate. And whether that comes from a moral, I don't like the word moral, but from that standpoint, it feels like we're doing it because we have something that we want to put out into the world, and that therefore we do feel responsible for. Because there's I guess it would be interesting to maybe ask you about why you don't consider yourself an artist at this point when you're making images, and the difference between making images and then making artworks that you put out into the world that try and communicate something that you do take responsibility for. And also maybe the interesting thing is maybe how do you take responsibility for the future of the artwork, how that gets used, how that gets disseminated, or are you just responsible for the presentation that you actually put into the world when you have control of it? Because images, once they're out there, there's copyright and things and there's legal cases, but most artists don't have access to the money to launch a legal case. So, once the image is out there, it can be used and misused and thrown around in places that you don't want it. I've said quite a few things there, so I'll stop.
Maybe answering that question. So I compared my AI work with your work, and I think my work is quite common and quite regular when you compare it to just the mass on the internet. So I think the mass that gets generated is just very grey stuff and not very interesting. But when I look at your work and your explorations with new technology, you really are able to break the systems and to make something new that I haven't seen before. So I think only a few can do that, and some of them are, I don't know, do you have an art background at an arts academy? Or
yeah, I do.
Self-trained?
Yeah.
Okay, you do. So many of them do, because we offer at arts academies very good training, and we try to help you to become that very good technology explorer, for example, or arts explorer. But many people are very good at it, whether they have a degree or not. But the ones that are good at it, that they make the difference, and they differentiate themselves when you look at the very huge art portfolios that are online now.
Tom has been very flattering there. But, for a bit of context, the work that he's talking about, you're using like text-to-image prompts. So, I don't know whether you use DALL-E or Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, but you're using those sort of tools, aren't you? And then what I have been using recently are a thing called neural radiance fields, or NERFs, which is a sort of AI for 3D scanning. But with all 3D scanning techniques, they really get confused by reflective surfaces. So I've been doing a bunch of projects where I insert mirrors into the environments that I scan, and then essentially it gets very baffled by what it sees, We have to be a bit loose with our terminology here. And use those glitches, essentially, in the reflections, where it takes 2D images and it creates new space that actually doesn't exist, but it thinks it exists. And so I've been making sort of point cloud environments through which to imagine spaces that don't exist.
Yeah, so then the difference we're talking about is everyone can make art, but not everyone can think or create like an artist, maybe. Do you think, Sarah, in the future, will the role of artists change more to the side that you have to, the way you think about it? Because everyone can make art, so what will the role of artists be in the future?
Just like one thing that I've been thinking the whole time as you were talking is it's really this question of what is art, and who is also the big question, who defines it? Like, is it then the museum that says that once you're shown there it's art? But because also sometimes with these interdisciplinary projects I feel like sometimes I myself am not sure whether I'm still doing art or how to also as an artist position myself in this collaboration to be free enough to still call it art and not be at the service of the institution. But then also, why is it only museums that can define what art is, and why is it not the single person that thinks that Tom's whatever he's generating is the most beautiful thing they've ever seen and they want to have it all over their room? And why is that less worthy of being called art? And then the role of artists in the future. I think it's a hard question. I think, like, I myself in my practice, I'm just very interested in these scenarios and of exploring all questions and communicating. So being also a concept artist and not very based on the outcome. I think, yeah, it's all about the ideas and sparking conversations. And that's where I see it. But then, as in other art forms, I think art is just a form of expression and communication and contextualization, and I think that will remain the same regardless of the tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah. So you're not really. You're saying actually it doesn't change because conceptualization will forever exist and start from a mind and create something.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I asked at ChatGPT whether they can write proposals for me for open calls, but they just have very bad, basic ideas.
It's a shame. I thought it would have saved you time to go out and create.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah.
But it's just very boring because all they do is recognize patterns and then recreate the patterns, and then they have a random element to it. Mm-hmm. But that is, it's just not sensitive, and I think that's something that we will keep as humans and actually make the human in the art creation even more important. But what I hope for is that more people will, that then maybe art production isn't so reliant on big budget anymore. Because, of course, if you can pay 30,000 euros to build a huge sculpture, it doesn't matter what the sculpture is, it just looks impressive.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of my hope, that everybody can create something that people think is interesting enough with the small means that they have.
Yeah, sometimes you can touch only a few people, but your effect will be big enough for it to start moving people. Mm-hmm. And Jacco, what do you think about the future? Do you think you can?
I think if you roughly take like an art historical perspective, you see that what is art is defined by the person that's paying for it. So in the 1600s, if you wanted to get a portrait, that you had it made and that was art and it was hanging on your wall. Then later we got the galleries and the museums. They're saying, okay, this is a great aesthetic gesture, so this is art. Then we go a little bit later and we get all of these movements happening. Okay, now it's reflecting on the current time, so that's art. And now we have made and it's because of the immateriality of work, because of the installation art, because of the new media, like the digital media, virtual reality, whatever, all of this stuff. we see kind of a radical shift where now, let's say, galleries are way less interested in this new media art because it's very simple. It doesn't have an object that you can put somewhere in someone's house, right? So now we, as an art society, we massively go to these funding strategies, these funding bodies, which kind of subsidy, everyone gets their own subsidy. I'm looking for a subsidy for myself, please. And then that leads to that now the artist is at the whim of national or local governments to define, okay, what is deemed art and what is deemed valuable, right? And now we've made kind of a shift to basically living off of, let's say, communal money. I didn't want to say tax money because that has kind of a bad stigma. That's not what I mean. But that makes that these people that write these subsidy applications, that make these subsidy applications, they need to, they are responsible for this civil money. They're responsible for this public money. And I find that in my kind of like perspective, that is part of why now we see all of this kind of art that is dealing with all of these societal issues and civil situations. Of course, it's the artist wants to be responsible. At the same time, it's okay. I want to produce. Very practical problem. I no longer am able to rely purely on aesthetics or the myth of the artist as genius or something like this in order to sustain myself, so now I need to become relevant. And I don't know about you guys, it's not in my interest to be relevant. So the relevancy becomes a pragmatic approach that you then can do to actually change the world, rather than everything else that came before.
Yeah, the desire starts from you creating art, not from you wanting
sure.
to be relevant or touching on the social topics.
And then, of course, those things interlingue with each other. But fundamentally, I'm interested in telling stories.
Or open calls where you have to use a certain technology that someone developed for your artwork. And basically, you're just advertising, but to a different type of target group than you could reach via ads.
Yeah.
So to very quickly then go to the future of art, I think who is going to pay for it next? I don't know. Hopefully we'll find a structure where the person paying for it believes in the artist enough to set it free. I think this is my big dream.
That sounds beautiful.